Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you the 5 best Ark cave tames. And before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help the channel. In at number 5 is the Megalosaurus. Now this really is an insane caving creature as long as you have a cryopod, as this thing isn't going to fit into every cave entrance. This thing also does actually spawn in caves as well, so it does really make sense why it is a great caving creature. But also, don't use this thing in the daytime as it is going to be an absolute pain, but as soon as it turns night, this thing is an absolute walking menace. It has an insane amount of melee damage and a reasonable health stat to go along with it. Just maybe don't fight Microraptors with it, as that isn't going to end well. But as you can see here, it is actually utilizing one of its abilities. It will grab creatures in its mouth and absolutely demolish them, and they have no way of attacking back. And this is truly a great ability for just getting rid of all of those tiny creatures that are just really annoying you, like Microraptors, and in this case, definitely Microraptors. But this thing is also great at killing many other creatures as well. This thing has a very reasonable amount of melee damage and will basically kill anything that it attacks. A Baryonyx, very easy. A Spino, also very easy. And you could even do something like a Giga or a Carcharodontosaurus. And if you're really going for it, maybe a Titanosaur. Also, another feature that they have which makes them really great for caving is they are actually very mobile and they are reasonably small. Obviously not as small as a Baryonyx is, but they will still fit into most caves, and if you have cryopods, these things will be fine in any cave. These are a definite caving creature if you can shell out for the mild difficulty in taming one. In at number 4 is the Mantis. Now personally, I think this is actually a great creature for caves. Obviously not underwater caves, and I probably wouldn't bring it into caves with lava as well, but this thing is still great for most of Ark's caves. Namely, it is quite a small creature. This thing will fit into pretty much any cave, and if you do have a cryopod, all of those little tight gaps, this thing should be able to get through, as you can just cryo it up, walk through yourself, and then cryo it outside of that gap. But the main reason why these things are actually good for caving, especially in quicker caves, is their ability that they can equip melee weapons. So you can have some pikes on your Mantis, or in this case, swords, and you can just plow through loads and loads of insects. You will just have to be wary about their health stat though, as sometimes that can be a bit iffy, and you really don't want to get your Mantis killed, as these things are a little bit of a pain to tame, as they require a ghillie suit, bug repellent, and either deathworm horns or woolly rhino horns. And it can take quite a lot of them if you are taming a high level, and if you're doing caves, you probably are going to want to tame yourself a high level, as you don't want this thing to absolutely suck in a cave. But if you do tame a Mantis of reasonable level, these things will be great for any cave runs you have. Just remember, like I've said many times, to really keep an eye on that health. In at number 3 is the Megatherium. Now, if you didn't know about the Megatherium special ability, then you will not know how good of an insect killer this thing has. And actually, one of the main enemies that you will face in any kind of caves are insects, so it really does make sense why this thing deserves to be on this list. This thing is absolutely insane for killing insects, and it is the best creature by far for that. And especially in the caves with just so many insect enemies, having one of these things on your side is great. But there are some disadvantages to these things, namely they are quite big, so they're not really going to fit into smaller caves, and you're going to have to utilize cryopods. And then you'll probably have to wait for some cryosickness timers, as any tight squeeze in a cave this thing probably isn't going to fit through. But in some of Ark's bigger caves, this thing will definitely be great for the job, and it will be great for the job in any of these smaller caves as well, unless it's that one ice cave where you have to crouch the whole time. This thing is not going to fit, don't even try that. And pretty much for that cave, no creature's going to fit at all. But for those caves of reasonable size with loads and loads and loads of insects in it, these things are a great shout, as they will plow through them with ease. And you can also utilize other creatures in the cave as well, but have this as a backup. In at number 2 is the Thyla. Now this thing actually is a really great cave creature. Yes, you may want to take something like a Sabertooth in, but I find they don't really do enough damage and they don't have enough health to rack up in most cave situations. And the Thyla definitely does deal enough damage and has enough health and agility to get the job done. The Thyla is equipped with a wealth of abilities, namely its bleed ability when it attacks. This is insanely useful when attacking any kind of creature. Yes, it does not have a buff, which is insane at attacking insects, but this thing can still really pack a punch. Overall, this thing is a very good creature for caving and better than the Megatherium, mainly because it is a lot smaller, and for caving, the size of the creature is probably one of the main factors. Obviously, health is going to be very important and damage as well, as you do need your creature to actually fight through the enemies and you need it to survive, but size is really something you need to consider, and the Thyla is a reasonable size for caving. It may not fit into every cave entrance, but with cryopods, this thing will be fine in almost every cave. But don't take this thing to underwater caves, as it is just going to drown. They are actually okay at swimming, so if the cave you're trying to run has a few underwater sections, these things will be fine, but don't take them into the underwater caves. And in at number 1 is the Baryonyx. Now these things are definitely a favourite of mine, and I personally think every Ark player should tame one of these things, especially if you are doing caving, as that is one of the main reasons to tame this thing. This thing is by far the beast of doing any cave run. Firstly, this thing has a very reasonable melee stat, and it will get you through any cave enemy that you can find. Unless you're going through hordes of insects, the Megatherium is still going to be the best at that. But also, on top of that, it does have a reasonable health stat as well. This thing is going to survive through any cave run that you go through, and these things have a horde of special abilities on top of that. Now, if you didn't know already, the Baryonyx has a secret ability underwater. When the Baryonyx goes underwater and you press C on your keyboard, it will have a spinning ability. This thing works as an attack. It's not going to do any damage, but it is going to stun any creature up to the size of a Megalodon. So this actually makes the Baryonyx a very viable creature for doing the underwater caves. Yes, a Basilo would be a great shout as well, but if you're on a bit of a budget, I might say, the Baryonyx is a great shout for doing those underwater caves as well. Also, on top of that, this thing's size is absolutely perfect. This thing fits into almost any cave, apart from that one cave where literally no creature can fit in, and that makes this thing so much more useful, as you do not have to wait for cryo timers, and in most cases you don't even need to use cryopods. So if you do not have access to them yet, the 5 best combat dinos for Ark Survival Evolved. In at number 5 is the Spino. Now, in my opinion, the Spino is an absolutely amazing combat creature, mainly due to how much damage it does and how many abilities it has to assist with its damage. Firstly, it has the hydration buff, which the Shadowmane has as well, which enables it to do insane damage when in or touching water. Also, on top of that, it can stand up on its hind legs and do even more damage. A high level Spino with all of these abilities is actually going to do more damage than a Rex, but it does lack compared to the Rex in one major field. It has a lot less health than the Rex. Now, don't get me wrong, the Spino still has a reasonable health stat. It will still get you through most things quite easily, and quite a few bosses easily. But for the larger threats on Ark and those longer bosses, this thing's health just simply can't keep up with something like a Rex. Yes, 20k health is still great for any Ark creature, but compared to when you're getting your Rexes up to 50k health, it's not even half of the health of what a good leveled Rex can have. And for some of those longer bosses, especially the Master Controller on Genesis Part 2, it simply does not stack up in any way to the Rex. But all of this doesn't mean the Spino is a terrible combat creature, and obviously it isn't, because it wouldn't be on the list otherwise. this thing is still very useful and is actually a lot easier to tame than the Rex usually, because it spawns in less hostile environments, as there are less dangerous creatures around where a Spino is, because it's usually killed everything else, or it spawns in quite desolate areas. And speaking of the Rex, in at number 4 is the Rex. Now overall, the Rex is a lot better than the Spino for combat, mainly due to its much higher health stat. Whereas Spino has 20k, this thing can level up to something like 50k if you go breeding madness on these things. Just maybe don't take these things swimming. The Spino definitely does have a big advantage there. And also in terms of mobility, the Spino does have a big advantage as well. But today we're not talking about mobility, we're talking about sheer skill in combat. And this is a great creature for doing anything like that. This thing is great for doing any bosses if there aren't significant other creatures that will do better. For example, on the Broodmother, a Megatherium is going to do a lot better than a Rex because of that insect buff. But for something like the Dragon, you should never use the Rex because it has a buff against carnivores. But for pretty much every boss that isn't underwater, I'm talking about the Moda there, this thing will do great for every single Ark boss. And it really does show, because most Ark players will use Rexes, a Uti and a Daedon for pretty much every boss that they do. And also, on top of all of that, the Rex is just generally a fun creature to have. You can't say it isn't cool to ride around on a really high level Rex and just absolutely decimate every creature in the area. These things are great. In at number 3 is the Megatherium. Now briefly, we did talk about this when I talked about the Rex, and I mentioned that this thing is great for defeating the Broodmother. It is also a great caving creature, and it is great for killing any kind of insect. And the reason why this is because it has a special buff. Don't get confused with this buff and the alpha buff as well, as they look very similar. Once the Megatherium has killed a bug, it will have an ominous orange glow, and then it will just go into all fury. And I'm pretty sure it is called the Insect Rage buff or something similar to that. Also, on top of that, it is reasonably mobile and it has a decent health stat. But like every Ark combat herbivore, this thing does have a major downside, and that is the fact that herbivores can't actually heal very quickly. But in a boss situation with the Daedon, this shouldn't be much of an issue. But when you're just going out to kill some creatures to gather some chitin, you're not realistically going to bring a Daedon with you everywhere. So you'll have to use sweet vegetable cakes. And let me tell you, sweet vegetable cakes are actually very expensive, and a hell of a lot more expensive than meat. So be careful when you're going into long battles with this thing, as it will take quite a while to heal, so remember to really level some health when you get yourself a Megatherium. In at number 2 is the Giga. Now you probably expected this thing to be on the list, and you would definitely be right. This thing is an absolutely insane combat creature, but not a great boss creature, because this thing actually isn't allowed into most boss arenas, as it is considered too powerful. But on Extinction, all of the Titans use Gigas or Titans, or the next creature that is on this list. Either way, the Giga is an absolute hunk of a creature. It deals an immense amount of damage and has a hell of a lot of health. The Rex absolutely pales in comparison to the Giga. This thing can absolutely demolish through any creature that you will see in Ark. And if this thing was allowed into more boss arenas, I'm sure it would be very useful then. But the Giga has two main downsides. The first one that I want to talk about is its absolutely abysmal stamina. This thing's stamina is absolutely awful. It is going to run out of stamina so quickly, you can barely get this thing around without just a little thing popping up to say you've run out of stamina. And no matter how many levels you put into stamina, it's simply not going to improve for you, which is really sad. And the other downside is it has a rage meter, so once it has been dealt enough damage from whatever you were trying to fight, it will kick you off and simply go into a rage, killing you and also probably killing the creature you were trying to attack, considering it's not a boss. And in at number 1 is the Carcharodontosaurus. Now, in my opinion, this thing absolutely replaces the Giga in every way. This is by far the most insane, most powerful, most useful combat creature in my opinion. Except it still can't be let into most boss arenas, so you're still going to have to resort to a Rex or a Megatherium or whatever is more useful for those cases. But the reason why the Carcharodontosaurus is so much better than the Giga is it does everything the Giga does, but it does it a little bit better, and it fixes all of the issues I had with the Giga. Firstly, this thing's stamina doesn't actually suck. It's not great at the beginning, but leveling it does actually make a difference. I wouldn't recommend putting all of your levels into it, as this is a combat creature and not a travel creature, but its stamina is still very reasonable. Also, on top of that, it doesn't have a rage meter as well, so it's not going to kick you off and absolutely demolish you. This thing also does have a blood rage, which means once it has killed enough creatures, it is going to do an insanely buffed amount of damage. And once it has actually reached this blood rage high, it's going to be dealing even more damage than the Giga. But like every great creature, it still does have a downside, and that is its taming method is a bit buggy at times, and it can really go wrong. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't agree with this list, comment your top 5 in the comments down below, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.